Hi YouTube, this video is not a development log, unlike many of my other videos. This is actually quite a unique video. This is what I wish I'd watched before I started developing my game, which for those of you who don't know is called Matter. Okay, the name's a work in progress. If not, I'm keeping it for nostalgic reasons. And I have a lot of tabs open. Yes, and it's here on the forums in work in progress. It's quite buried. It's buried quite deep, I think. Oh, it's not too bad. But yes, here it is, it's in the forums. And no, I'm not advertising it. Yes, I started developing this game, if you look, in 2010, according to this thread. Although I actually started developing this game before then, but this is when I first posted it. And you'll now notice now it's March 2012, so it's been just under 2 years. So I thought I would really do a tutorial or do an overview of what is important with game design. So, I have craftily deleted all of my work up to this point. But here is an example comment I posted when someone had sort of sounded indignant about the way I'd worded something. I'd worded it very wrongly. And you can see here there's not really much formatting, and I haven't really replied very well. And this is just form etiquette, really. You should always put well-structured replies. It helps everyone. You see I've removed templates. So I did have, this link will be broken, I think. Yes. I did have a lot of examples, but they were very bad quality. Now, if you look at all this, here's an example image that someone has posted for me. If I go to the very last thread, here's a gun that I've worked on. This is incomparable to anything I've done before. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, I started my game project just under 2 years ago, although I started in Blender in 2008. Now, before anyone jumps to any conclusions, when I started in Blender 2008, I didn't know anything about game design, nothing about image creation, nothing about coding apart from the odd HTML, and nothing about Blender. Now, I found Blender through some extensive Googling, and a lot of people were sort of talking about Blender, but this was the 2.49b stages, I think it might have been even earlier, and it was a very interesting engine to use. If anyone remembers 2.4, the user interface, I would think now, was disgusting, for want of a better word. The icons were everywhere, so many of them, and nothing told you what you had to work out what things did by pressing on buttons and seeing what happened. Now, because I started off early, I was very eager to create a game, and I didn't really think about it. Whenever I play on first-person shooters, for example, I hear people cursing the game for being inaccurate or for being bad in some respect, but none of them really know how much work goes into creating a game. So this is why I'm creating this video. I was in the same boat. I didn't know anything about games, and I thought it was very easy to create a game, but it's not. Now, the most important thing you should think about when you create a game is just how big a project your undertaking is. Because what happened with me, I started my first-person shooter. It looked like any other first-person shooter. Things are hacky. It was very difficult to update because everything was dependent on object card-coded names and logic bricks, and I didn't like it. It was uncomfortable to work with, and that's not something you want. Now, my game, I've updated it recently, and it's just so fun to code and work in because it just feels natural. And I'm going to thank Novus Terra for that, because I looked at their code base and it made me realise I could work in such a more object-oriented fashion where everything links in like it would in real life. But that's another story. So I started learning. I was going to create a racing game at first, and I thought, no, I want to make a first-person shooter, and I wanted to make a zombie game. As everyone does, apparently, on these forums. So, first things first, I ignored everyone's advice who told me to start a smaller project. And like many of the people who I find on these forums today, I had no clue what I was undertaking, and I asked for help every 5 minutes. So, it's a big project, and you need to know how to do things. So let's assume it's your first project for now. Before you create any game, you need to have some prerequisites already established. The first thing is you need a tidy work area, which mine isn't at the moment, because I'm revising. You need to have a desk, preferably, with a reasonable sized monitor. I'm not going to lie, a big monitor is good. And a good computer. which everyone says you don't, but it just makes things so much more easy to work with. And you also need decent software and spare time, lots of it. I've been working on my current updated version of Matter for over a year, I think. If I check on page 8, that's probably a good place to... Oh no, it's before here even. So this is 2011. I think it's probably around page 4. Acid Penguin just joined me then. No, it's before here. Gosh. Yes, it's probably just around here when I got my team together. This was in 2010, late 2010 in fact. Or was it page 3? I think it's probably page 3. Anyway, yes, here we go. This Acid Penguin, by the way, he's a great guy. Really helpful. He's been he has done the majority of map modelling on this game, and he's been very helpful. So a bit of credit to him. Now, presuming that you've got all these prerequisites, you'll understand why these are important later. You move on to development. Now, when you're creating a game, you need to have all of these 6 points here. And I'm going to make this bigger just because it might look small. First things first, you need to have all the tools before you start. You can actually get away with everything. Everything I have is free apart from Camtasia. So there's Eclipse for Python using the PyDev add-on, which is great. Notepad++ when you're just messing around with code to post on forums and things, it's very quick to load up. And Google Chrome for browsing, FileZilla for anything you're doing on the web servers, Blender, and GIMP. Those are all the things you need, really. Inkscape, potentially. No, you don't need Photoshop. Everyone says you need Photoshop. You don't. Photoshop is actually a nice one to use, but the main thing is if people are taught in Photoshop, they feel comfortable with it. But you don't need it. So once you've got your tools ready, you need to know what is your game. Hold on one moment. What is it about your game that makes it special? So things like plot, what happens in it, why does it happen? And these things are very important, and you need to know a lot about this. This is very, very, very important. You need to know exactly how your game is going to work, what's going to happen, just so you know what you're making. You can't start without an idea. Goals. What should be unique about your game and how you're going to achieve it. Similar to the plot, but things like you want to have zombies, that's always a mechanic you need to work around. Cooperative play. Understanding, right, that's how you're going to achieve all this. This isn't about the tools, this is about how everything would work in a game design perspective. For example, shooting a gun isn't shooting a gun in terms of a game design. Shooting a gun is a complex series of tasks. Firstly, you would create a ray, you'd have a point at which you'd find the gun, you'd have all the attributes about ammo. When someone triggered a fire event, you would check if it had ammo. If it does, you would find the point at which the muzzle is at the end of the gun. You would fire a ray along the direction of the gun. If that ray hits anything within the range of the gun, you would then detect that as an object. You would detect the health of the object. You would reduce the health depending on force. It gets complicated. That's what understanding is. So how are you going to achieve everything in your game? This comes with experience and breaking it down into subtasks. For example, a gun. Firstly, the gun checks to see if it can be shot. Then it is actually fired, and you need to understand what firing means. It hits an object. So how are you going to hit an object? Using a ray sensor or a ray cast. And then, following that, the action of what happens. What do you do once you've shot a person? How does that person get affected by your gun? And that's really understanding. Knowledge is probably the biggest task, actually, apart from your plot and goals, is how do you do this in terms of code or in terms of your actual game engine? Knowledge is something that you need to work on severely at the start of your game design. My first attempt at my first-person shooter gave me the knowledge, really, to work on my second attempt. You learn how to texture, you learn how texturing affects your game, what texture types mean, why they're important. You learn to have a standard of quality, and if you don't meet that, you improve your design until you reach that standard of quality. To be honest, the only way you're going to get knowledge is but through experience. So my best suggestion is, think of a small game that isn't going to be too big, but will encompass most of the areas of the software you're going to use for your next project, and attempt to finish it, like a tower defense game or something small, not big. maybe a platformer. Everyone recommends platformers. They can be complex, but they're very good at learning the game engine. Anything in terms of shooting or first-person shooters or real-time strategy games, avoid at all costs until you know how to do it, and that's coming from experience. And everyone thinks they're different, but they aren't really. I thought I was different, but it's the same for everyone. Creating textures, I'm still not very good at texturing, but I'm getting a lot better. It's not about, I can map textures, but I don't really understand how you create a texture, but I'm working on that now. And it's really about getting good UV exports. But yes, aside from that, overview is just, you know what you need to have achieved, and hopefully when you've got to achieve it by establishing a roadmap. So that's most of the development, really. That's all you ever do in development. You have tasks, you break them down into methods of achieving each task. You learn how to do that in your game engine, and then you make sure you hit those tasks by deadlines. Now, it's important you have deadlines, but also standards of development. If you don't have a good standard, your game will be bad. My first guns I ever created were really quite bad. The geometry was disgusting. My latest guns, I think, have got good geometry, actually. Some of them have got stupid amounts of geometry in terms of polygons, and I've baked those into, I'm going to bake those into low poly. That's going to take some time, though, because I've got to just create a nice UV layout for them. But next up is team. And I've left this blank because this changes from person to person. There are quite a few people who've created first-person shooters. No, not just first-person shooters, in fact, every type of game solo. And hats off to them, because that's an achievement. It's so hard. It makes it easier in respects that you know exactly who's done what, because you yourself and yourself are all the same person, and you know what you've done. But it gives you a bigger workload. For me, whilst Acid Penguin was creating all the maps, all I did, I let him do the maps, and I gave him the ideas and then the graphics and the artwork, but he did it all under his own steam, whilst I was implementing the physical dynamics to the game, and it helped me so much. I felt it's quite a demeaning task, and it just felt quite, I didn't enjoy it, and that's not a place to be. Right now I'm struggling because I'm waiting for artwork for a zombie character that will be your representative of your other clients, and I need to get the artwork for that in order to model it. I've got modelers, but I don't have any concept art. So in fact, if you're good at concept art, give me a shout, because I just need some soon. I haven't got the time to make it at the moment. Team is all about helping you out. You need to find people who are good. Don't accept people who aren't good. And this is going to sound really rude, but the way in which you become good and you become desired as a modeler or as a coder is to get experience. Experience by doing your own game project and producing quality that you are proud of as well as everyone else. This is quite harsh to say that you shouldn't train people, but they become dead weights and produce things you don't want in your game, crudely. But team players are important, and the other thing about team players is you need to help them know what they're going to do. If you're in charge, you give them tasks and give them deadlines, then they've got nothing to complain about. If you don't give them deadlines or don't give them tasks, they're sitting there idle, wasting their time. I had problems with this at certain points. I needed art, I don't have it. And still, one of my friends, Mika702, is waiting on me at the moment, and I feel bad, but I can't do much about it. But your team should all be important, and you must consider their needs, because your team work for you. But at the same token, they don't have to, especially on Blender artists. We're all a community of we don't get paid for the majority. I've done some freelance work, but most of my teamwork is with other people like me. It's a hobby. So you need to encourage them to stay, but you need to give them a reason to stay. You mustn't just, if you start abusing them or if you start undervaluing them, they're going to leave. That's most of your team. The only other thing about teams is everyone must understand what they're trying to do. They must have a standard of quality, but also they must all have guidelines, such as dimensions that should be kept constant. Maybe give people certain tasks they always do, such as texturing maps, or metal textures, for example, because that's their area of expertise. That's important. Now, assuming that's all correct, you're ready for your first game. Everyone thinks, once you've been given all these tips, the one thing that crops up is understanding and knowledge. These are things that people don't understand and they can't achieve very easily. So let's look at these 2 points. Oops, I can't drag. These 2 points here. I'm going to show you some of my code for my game. If I close all these tabs, and I open a file, and I'm going to open game.py. I'm also going to open initialize.py. What happens here? First thing is first. In fact, I don't think this is right. No, this isn't. See, I should know my own game. My changelog path. First thing that ever gets called is this path hack file. All this does is it changes the current working directory to my subfolder. And this subfolder is kept in Dropbox. Now, Dropbox is great because it synchronizes between PCs, all the team members can have it, and it gives you a clean workspace. So that's part of the first point I raised. Once this has happened, core is a folder which I've given an init.py, which recognizes it as a module. This calls initialize. Initialize imports system. It appends this path to the system, to the system path file, just so it gives you access to the rest of the script, and then it imports the game.py. When the game is run, the game in the game engine, it calls the main function, and it checks if you don't have the game attribute. If you don't, creates it, and then it updates your game every tick. It updates the game state. That is the entry point to the game. Here is game.py. This is you'd argue it's the top level, but it's not. It's actually below initialize.py. This is the home of everything, really. These are all my game modules that are imported. Here are the Blender modules, and here are the Python modules. This is just for nice aesthetics, really. I don't know if I still need this, to be honest. I don't really like the OS part of this. It messes up, but this works. So I store the time which the game started, and the game is running, and the time the game's been running for. The reason I do this is because once the class is called, it runs the init function, and that's the start of the game. It's very easy to use. I keep as an object-oriented approach. Everything is kept relative to where it should be. Control options are attributes of the game, not of the user interface, for example. Although you could argue they are, but for example, they're not attributes of the sound of the game, because they're generic to everything. These are for movement, for shooting, ending the game. Control variables, again, kept on the game. The data path, that's something all the game will use. Map files, asset files, they're what the game uses. Now, the game's children are world, UI, sound, network, and console. These are all attributes of the game, and they're all parts of the game, but they don't run side by side with the game because they form the game. Therefore, they are attributes of the game, and thus they are children of the game, which is why they instance on self. Now, you notice I've copied all this code down here, and it's called system.game, system.world, system.ui. System is a module, and it starts off as blank. Or I think it might have an attribute, actually. I'll have a look. No, but it gives us access to the game scope from every module. What this means is the sound module can access the game or the UI from itself from one module, because in terms of the game, that module is basically like a temporary data store, and it's cleaned once the game is closed. It's wiped. Okay, so the quit game is kept, and the update function updates the entire game. If you quit the game using a key that isn't the escape key, it will tell you how long the game's been running for, and it will sorry, I lost my track of thought, sorry. If you press the escape key, it'll tell you how long the game's running for, and it'll close all the bits that need closing, etc. Just for good measure. Hopefully stopping memory leaks. This stops the order space module, for example. But in the update function, it also updates the world, the UI, and the network. So let's look at world.py. World describes the game world. The world is anything that exists inside the game that's a physical entity. However, you might have different worlds. So that's where the terrain comes in. Terrain is basically the ground and the entities like trees, and they can different they're not part of the world, they're just part of the terrain of the world, because other things in the world can exist, such as the player, and what else could exist? I'm trying to think of how to describe this to you. The skybox can exist in the world, but it's not part of the terrain. That's why the terrain is a separate module. This initializes the terrain manager and everything, and when the load is called in the world, it loads a blend file. It looks for a blend file with a name, loads that blend file through the terrain load, which I'll show you here. It's a bit confusing, but don't worry. It calls that file through terrain, loads it, and then when the file has been loaded, the terrain calls system.world.terrainLoaded, which basically says the world has been loaded, which then spawns your player and shows you the heads-up display scene. And every time the world is updated, it updates the player, because the player is an attribute of the world, and it updates the terrain because the terrain is an attribute of the world. And that's basically how the whole game works. And here is my data path. Data has all the assets, fonts, maps, and sounds. Network is just the home of the network code, themes, the beach UI for user interface. So it's very logical. It means finding bugs isn't that hard compared to having lots of different scripts. And it also means that my overall file size, I believe, is very small, apart from the data path, 60 megabytes. And if I don't copy data, if I don't change the size of the file of data, it should be significantly less. 2.6 megabytes. So the majority of the file size is kept in the the maps, which is 25 megabytes, and a sound file, which is very long as well. So this is how my game structure works, and this is just some experience. If you want to actually look at how a good game works, look at the Novus Terra source code on Google Code. That's very good. I'm sure the people will be happy to help you. One other thing I'm going to show you before I go is my multiplayer code. Plugins.py, and I'm going to open this with Notepad++. Oops, that's rather large. Here I have some custom functions, which hopefully, these are all optimizations to speed up the game, and you see lots and lots of classes and code, and it can be quite intimidating. I've added lots of comments so you can understand it. Sometimes I find myself forgetting how everything works, which is why comments are useful. In the release version, you can probably remove all the comments and change everything to make it as efficient as possible, but as this is always a work in progress, I don't. But essentially, all this is a similar process, but I've optimized to look neater, to be more efficient, and so on. For example, here is my custom function get_else_set_dict. That should be dict, but I haven't called the function that. What this does is a bit like dictionary.get. The .get function will try to retrieve a value, and if it doesn't, you can make it return a custom value like get hello from the dictionary, otherwise return 1, or Adam. This is great. However, if you want to set this value in the dictionary, you've got to use a check, and you've got to check using an if statement, and it renders this whole bit useless. So, to get over this, I've used the function here, which tries to get this value from this value, so the value of sender object from the dictionary registered plugin senders, and if it doesn't, it will set it to this value and then return that. The problem is down here, even though these are both dictionaries, the default value I tried to send is actually a method, and so it returns the method rather than the value of executing the method. Bit of Python for you. But essentially, this is all optimized as much as I can to save logic time. And I think this is quite efficient. And this all started from a haphazard concept which took me a while to make. Why am I showing this? Well, classes, functions, they all become very useful, and you should learn them. You should learn everything before you finish it. This is going to be an awfully long tutorial, I have a feeling. 24 minutes, okay. Sorry for boring you. But I don't want to save any of my changes, really. Actually, no, I want to keep that closed, don't save. That's my game. Now, the only other thing that I want to show the importance of is user fan base. I have a website here, which I'm updating at the moment. And I think it looks quite nice, actually. That's just my opinion. It tells you about, and it gives you some news, and media will be coming soon, hopefully, once my website host is fixed. This is one of my friends has created this for me, but it's about telling everyone what they're looking at, and that's important. Having a YouTube channel is also very important, which is why I have a YouTube channel. This keeps people hooked, and it shows you that you're doing something. Even if it's nothing big, I've had...
Hello everyone, this is...
I've had small updates each time. So, as a final note, know what you need to do, prepare for it, understand everything you have to do before you do it, then do it. And tell everyone what you're doing so they're interested. And keep yourself interested, that's the main thing. If I can do any improvements on this, please give me a shout. Thank you for watching, and I hope you will have a nice Easter, as I am revising. Boring as anything, but I hope you have a nice Easter. And I will probably post another Python video up as soon as my web host is fixed.